This is our next lesson in Unit 17. We're going to look at some material out of Box E here, angles and parallel lines. So there are three basic things that you need to know, or you need to recognize, when you see two lines that are parallel, okay, that have a third line. This third line here is called a transversal that comes down and it crosses both of them. There are three patterns that you want to be able to recognize. Okay. The first one are what are called alternate angles. So these two angles with the black dots are alternate angles. And this pattern is sometimes called the Z pattern. Because if I sort of draw, I got a sort of a funny looking Z that I draw like this. And these two things are underneath the arms of the Z. Or I could have the Z kind of going backwards. Like this, and like this. Again, these two angles would be underneath or inside the corners of the Z. These are called alternate angles, and alternate angles are always equal. So that means if that one there with the black dot was, if this one, sorry, let's do this one I did in green. If this one under here is 40 degrees, this one down here is 40 degrees as well. Okay? So if they give you one of these, you know immediately what the other one is. The next one is what are called corresponding angles. And for corresponding angles, this is sometimes called the F pattern. Because if we look at these two angles that are marked with a Y, and I draw this in like this, this is kind of a backwards looking F. The two Y's here are underneath the arms of the F. Okay, Y and Y there. So corresponding angles, or angles that are underneath the arms of the F, are equal as well. The third pattern is, they're called co-interior angles. This is sometimes called the C pattern. Because if I look at these two angles, A and B, they're sort of inside this little backward C that we've got here. Okay. So angles that are inside that C like that add to 180. So A plus B equal 180 degrees. So we've got this Z pattern where the angles are equal, this F pattern where the angles that are underneath the arms of the F are equal, and we've got this C pattern where the angles that are inside the C add up to 180 degrees. And remember, this only works if these two lines are parallel. So what you need to be able to do on the test is, if you're given a situation like this, some picture with unknown angles marked, you need to be able to find the measures of the unknown angles. So let's take a look at this first one here. We want to be able to recognize either the F pattern, the Z pattern, or that C pattern, and use it to figure out these angles C and D. So do we see any of these patterns in this picture here that are going to help us use this angle that we know to get one of these unknown angles? What do you think? Brody? Okay, where do you see the Z here? Right like this? The other way like this? Okay. So if we were to draw that Z in here like this, that would tell us that this angle right in here and this angle right up here are the same. Okay. Now, we don't know this angle and we don't know this angle. So even though that's a good Z pattern, it doesn't help us to figure out the unknown angle C. Okay, so I'm just going to erase that. There we go. All right. What if we draw this like this? Okay. Which one of those three patterns have I drawn there? Fiona? It's an F pattern. Yeah, it's backwards, but we still have that F there. So what do we know about angles that are underneath the arms of the F pattern? Well, 65 is underneath one of the arms. D is underneath the other arm. What do we know about those two angles then? They're going to be the same. So right away we know that D is equal to 65 degrees. Okay. Now, how can we figure out C here? Well, I can draw another pattern here, like this, and like this, and like this. Okay. So what have I drawn there? Even though it's backwards here. Riley? That's our C pattern. What do we know about the angles in the C pattern? Exactly. They add up to 180 degrees. So I can find C by doing 180 minus that 65. Punch this into my calculator, and that's going to tell me that C equals 115. Okay. And to explain how we got these things, we could just put in brackets here that we did the C pattern for this one, and we did the F pattern for this one. Okay. Right. So let's take a look at this next one here. We've got, again, two parallel lines with another line that is crossing it. How can we get any of these? We got A, B, and C that we have to find. Let's start looking for these patterns here. I'm going to follow Brody's suggestion. I'm going to draw a Z pattern for this one. Okay. This angle and this angle are sort of underneath those, or inside that Z pattern here. So what do I know about angle A and that 125? Drake, what do I know about these two? If they make that Z pattern, here and here. They got to be the same. So A with 125 degrees. Okay. So sometimes it's helpful to write one of the answers you've got on there, 125 degrees. Okay. Now, how can I figure out B or C? Now, you don't necessarily have to use the F, C, and Z. If you can see some other way of getting them, using the angle properties that we've already used, we could use that as well. So, Montana, what were you going to say? Absolutely. We could definitely draw a C here, and then A and B are both inside that C pattern, so they have to add up to 180 degrees. So B will equal 180 degrees minus 125. So we punch this into our calculators here, and we get that B is 55 degrees. We got that from our C pattern. Okay. We should say that we got this from our Z pattern. We got one angle left, angle C over here. Now there's a quick way of getting it that doesn't involve the F, the C, or the Z. Okay, using something that you learned in a previous section here. Montana? Absolutely. It's opposite because it's across from angle A. So what do we know about the opposite angles? They have to be the same. So we can just write down here that angle C is equal to 125 degrees. And if we wanted to, we could say we use the opposite angle theorem to get that. Okay. All right, we want to try one more? Get a little bit complicated. We'll do this last one over here. We've got D, E, and F. Okay. So we got three angles that we need to find here. How are we going to go about this? So the first thing we might see is we might see a little Z. Drake said there was a Z right above the D. Yeah. So this is the top of our Z. Our Z comes down like this, and it goes back like that. So how does that help us, Drake? Yeah, so that tells us right away that D equals 75 degrees, because that's our Z pattern. So I'm going to write 75 up there for D. Okay. Now, how can we get, is there another angle that we can get here? Let's see. I think that's all we can do from our F, C, and Z. we've got to think of another way of getting one of these other angles. So the angle I would go after here is angle E. Because now that we know that this is 75, what do we know about the 75 degrees, the 70 degrees, and the E? What do those three angles have to add up to? 180. How do you know it has to be 180? Because they make that straight line, right? Okay, so we can figure out what angle E is by doing 180 degrees minus that 70 degrees minus that 75 degrees. Punch this into our calculator here, and we get that that angle E there is going to be 35 degrees. Okay, so let's label that on the diagram here, 35 degrees. We only have one left, and that's angle F. Now we should be able to see how we can get angle F here. What do you think, Brody? What about that angle F? We can use one of those F, C, or Z patterns here. Excellent. Yeah, you could do the triangle, seeing that F, the 70 and the 75, they have to add up to 180 degrees. So, yeah, let's do that. We'll just say that using our triangle, we know that F is going to equal 180 minus 70 minus 75. That gets us 35 degrees. And we can say that this is due to, we'll just draw a little triangle in here. What do we notice about E and F? Brody, what do we notice here? They're the same. Does that make sense based on our diagram? Because notice, what we could have done is we could have drawn a Z like that. And E and F are inside the corners of that Z, so it would make perfect sense that this one is 35 degrees as well, because the Z pattern says that those two have to be equal. Okay. So, one last question we'll look at here. Because you could be given a question which asks you to do this the other way around. Here I've got two lines, A, B, and CD. Are these two lines parallel? How do you know, Drake? There's no lines on them? How can you tell from the angles? What do we notice about these two angles here? 30 and 35 degrees. They're not the same. Would they be the same if these two lines were parallel? They would be, because we would be able to draw this F pattern, and the F pattern tells us that the two angles that are underneath the arms of the F should be the same. But because they're not the same, we can tell that these two lines are not parallel. No, because the two angles are not the same. Let's say, in the F pattern are not the same. Okay, and we'll stop right there.